Ready to go.
My name is Gerd Strauss. I was born in Germany in a town called Gießen. I went to school there until the 5th grade in the high school, and in 1934 the governor of Hesse, where Gießen was located in, declared that no Jew could go any longer to any high school, university or college. My parents were fairly well off, and they got me 3 tutors who taught me in French, English, and general subjects, so that by 1936 I had a high school diploma. In the interim, my dad, who was a commodity broker, took me in as an apprentice, and I served from 1934 until 1936 as an apprentice of the business. My dad had 3 other partners, a half-brother, and a senior partner who also had a son. And the partners decided, when there came the time to close the business up or continue, or selling it to a Nazi arranged buyer to liquidate the business. My half-brother, who came from, we had the same father but a different mother, decided to go to the United States in 1934 because he was left $10,000 by one of my dad's late sisters. And he came back and had affidavits for himself and his wife and members of his family. And my dad asked him, "What did you do for me?" And my half-brother said, "Nothing. You have to go yourself." And my dad, who was 80 years old by that time, never talked to him again. I had trouble in Frankfurt to get any type of a job, but I volunteered to work in a belt factory and learned how to make ladies and men's belts. And when that business was closed down by the Nazis, I went to work for an export company which dealt in setting up hospitals all over the world. This was the Medicine Company. And one fine morning in the late 1937, beginning of 1938, I came to the business. There was a sign on the door that they had left Germany overnight, and thanked everybody for their jobs and left checks with the bank, and that was the end of it. I then became active in the Jewish Boy Scouts, which was the equivalent of the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization in the United States, and was supported by the B'nai B'rith in Germany to the tune of 500,000 marks every year. I became a leader in that group, and eventually was in charge of a youth home where these groups met. In July of 1938, the Gestapo showed up at my house and looked for me, and when my mother called me from the 5th floor apartment where I stayed, they told me that I would be arrested and would not come back home for quite some time. They supervised my packing a small valise, and we left for the soccer stadium in Frankfurt, where they assembled between 600 and 800 other Jews, and eventually we wound up in a concentration camp called Buchenwald. Concentration camp Buchenwald was perhaps the largest in Germany, only opened in 1937. Concentration camps were first established by Hitler within 2 months after he took power in 1933. And they were used to incarcerate political and other opponents of the Nazis. When I was arrested and brought to Buchenwald, I was put in a barracks with men who had been there since practically 1933 and were transferred from other concentration camps with no chance of ever being released. These were political leaders from socialist to communist. There were priests, there were pastors, there were all kinds of people there. but all of them were much older than I was, and they could have been my father. I only weighed 140 pounds when I came to the concentration camp, and therefore was not assigned heavy detailed work, but I cleaned the barracks, cleaned the bathrooms, and did all kinds of chores that the camp police assigned to me. I'm always asked what was my worst experience in the concentration camp, and I always describe it as follows. In December of 1938, a platform was erected on one edge of the square where we were counted and assembled every day twice. On top of that first platform, they set a second one and then the third one. And naturally, since we did not have any newspapers, radio, or television in those days, there was a lot of conjecture, a lot of talk about what was going to be the outcome of their building that platform. And most of them thought it was going to be for Christmas decorations. No such luck. They put some uprights in it, and over the upright another bar, and left it stand there. And one evening, after we were counted and found correct, the camp commandant got on the public radio that we had. That was our only connection to the outside or to anybody. And he said that a number of prisoners had escaped, and 5 of them were recaptured and brought back to the camp. And like it was necessary for him to have a court, he set up a court at which he was the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, the defense attorney, and the person who would take an appeal to any sentence that was coming down. And he decided, as the prosecutor and the judge and the jury, to sentence these 5 people to death. And he would say that, as an example, the prisoners would be marched by all the prisoners in the camp in order to get an idea what it would be like if one escaped from the camp and was recaptured. The 5 people were in cages. They must have been about as big as an old dog cage. They could not have left out, and the closer they came to us, the prisoners, the more where one could smell a stench coming from these cages, because naturally they had never been allowed to relieve themselves or were left out of those cages. The capos, the camp police, warned us not to try to not to get the stench. If anybody was caught that had clamped up their noses, they would be punished accordingly. And they marched these 5 prisoners by us, and most of us got sick, but we had little food during the day, so none of us threw up. After that, the 5 prisoners were taken to that platform that I was talking about before, and hung from there, and left then hanging for 48 hours. And I always remember how they dangled in the wind that came from the mountains that we were located on. In February of 1939, I was called to the camp commandant's offices and released from camp under certain conditions. I had to leave Germany within 30 days. I lost my citizenship. All I was getting was a pass to leave Germany and go to another country. I did not know where I was going to destine. I also had to sign all kinds of statements that I was not mistreated, that I was properly fed and looked after, and that I was completely satisfied what took place in camp. One last thing, which I later on violated, was that if Germany would ever have a war with another country that I was in, I could not join the fight against the Germans, which I violated as soon as I could in 1941. I came home to my parents and found out that my mother's younger brother, who had gone to Palestine in 1935, had found a student certificate for me to go to an art school in Jerusalem. I was never an artist, but this was one way to get out of the country. And on March 14, 1939, I said goodbye to my parents, and I caught a train which went from Munich to Trieste, because in Trieste the boats left for Palestine at that time. We did not fly because they didn't have planes to fly us out. On the 15th of March, the train landed in Munich, and we had to change to Italian railroads because they had different gauges than the German railroads. And I picked up a morning paper, and there was a big headline in it that Hitler had marched into Czechoslovakia and taken over Czechoslovakia during the night. I did not think we would leave Germany because both France and England had declared that if Hitler had any more ideas of taking over other countries in Europe, they would be defending Czechoslovakia. But they weren't ready to, so I got out, and I wound up a couple of days later in Trieste, where we had a few days layover, and then got on a 7,000-ton boat, and 2 weeks later I wound up in Israel, in Palestine, which is now the state of Israel. My uncle and his family were at the port, and were happy to see me, and I stayed with him for a few days before I went on from there to visit a girlfriend that I had from Germany who had gone to Palestine with the Youth Aliyah. But by the time I came, she had found herself another boyfriend, so that thing was over. I went to Jerusalem and reported to Bezalel School of Art, which is perhaps the finest art school in the total of Israel today. And I was told that until I spoke perfectly Hebrew, they would not let me start school. I had started Hebrew a number of times, but I didn't do too well in Germany. So I went to the kibbutz that I belonged to, which was called Kutzat Maayan, and there I got sick because I had contracted a number of boils in the back of my neck that never opened up or weren't open up before I came to Palestine. And I got a kidney infection. And the doctor who I saw decreed that I should go to a place where there was nothing but fruit juice available for me. And so I wound up in the Ganya Aleph, one of the first settlements in Palestine. And within 3 months I was cured. And I also spoke Hebrew perfectly well, because I found an 18-year-old girl who spoke nothing but Hebrew, so I learned really fast. I went back to Jerusalem and went to the art school until 1941, when I found out that my parents had been moved from where they lived before, where they owned the building, but it was taken away from them, and they were transferred to a place called Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia, or Terezin. I joined the British Army on February 2nd of 1941, and I was released in 1946 after 5.5 years. I decided the best way that I could serve was to do for revenge, was to become a soldier. And I joined the Palestine Regiment, and afterwards became a member of the MI6, or the Counterintelligence Service of the British Army. I had also served in the Haganah, in Chayav Haganah in Palestine, and I became a spy for the Haganah against the British. I was in the battlefield, from October 1942 until I got wounded in Italy by a sharpshooter in 1943 and practically lost my leg. I still have the scar where the wound went into my right leg. I was lucky that it wasn't amputated because an old British officer, who was obviously a medical officer, came and said, let's try something before we take away his leg. And he sent a nurse to the officers' mess, and she came back with 2 big bowls of sugar. I had contracted, as a result of the wound, a scarlet fever, a wound scarlet fever. I had scarlet fever as a youngster, and basically that immunizes you against any other recurrence. But it recurred, and the leg was swollen, but 3 or 4 times the regular size. The officer tied me down to the bed from all sides, and then took a scalpel and made a fast incision in the knee and opened it up with clamps and poured in the sugar that the lieutenant nurse had brought. And that, after 2 weeks, it started to grow tissue, because sugar has the quality to grow tissue, and my leg was saved in that manner. I was then posted back in the British Army. You were not released after you were wounded, not like the American Army, because they did not have the manpower. So they kept me in for sedentary duties because I was no good anymore as a soldier in the field. And I became in charge of the officers' mess of the fortress area of Haifa in Palestine, which gave me the opportunity to spy on the British and inform the Haganah of all kinds of things that happened. After the war, I got 2 battle stars from the British, and I got 2 decorations from the Haganah too, for my work that I'd done. It would take too long to tell you stories of what had happened when I was in the military. In the meantime, I had gotten married on an assignment to England whilst I was in the army. And the girl that I had met when she was 12 years old and I got married in 1945, approximately 10 years after I first met her. I think it was 11 years after I met her. After the war, she could not come to Palestine. Even so, I got her an official immigration certificate at a time when thousands of Jews tried to come to Palestine illegally. I had enough contacts in Palestine to do that. But she could not leave England with an English passport, because we had something similar to Intifada at that time in England for the second time. At first the Arabs rioted from 1936 to 1939, and then they started rioting after the war, 1946 until 1948. My half-brother, who had been a partner in the business, had volunteered for the Army of Occupation in Germany to distribute food under the Marshall Plan, because being in the commodity business, naturally he had a pretty good idea what was required. And he came to England, visited my wife, and decided that we should come to the United States because there was no chance of my getting back to England. I had been blacklisted by the British because finally my cover was blown. In 1947, I came to the United States. We first moved to Chicago because my mother-in-law, who lived with us for 33 years, had a brother there. But the brother and his family were not of great help to us because everything that they suggested to us, for us to do, was bad and was exactly the negative what they should have done. So we struck out on our own, and I started working in jewelry because I had started to work in jewelry in the Bezalel Art School. But in the meantime, I lost 5 years because I was 5 years in the army. So things became changed, and one of the companies I worked for, the owner of the company decided to fire me until I had a job that would mean something to my brains, because he said, if you're staying with my jewelry business, my foreman is 70 years old, my youngest worker is 67, and here you're coming in your late 20s. It does not make sense. So I started working for Spiegel's mail order house in Chicago, and I was with them from 1947 until 1954, when the companies were sold. I learned everything about merchandising and store management and store supervision and being a buyer. And I worked not only for Spiegel's, but I worked for Goldblatt's in Chicago. I went to Gimbel's in Philadelphia. I worked for Wilmington Dry Goods in Wilmington, Delaware, where I learned the discount business, and finally wound up with Giant Food in Washington, D.C., which set up the first discount food brokerage, and we set it up, and then everybody was left out of it after 2 or 3 years, because one of the founders of the company did not like what we were doing. But we contributed a great deal to the food profit, because food chains usually don't work on a higher profit than 3%. And us bringing in all kinds of other merchandise and doing a major job brought the net profit up to 5.5%. So I could not understand why this happened. I then went into real estate because I always felt that you might just as well deal in the highest product in the market, which real estate is anyway. And I became a real estate broker, and I was very successful with it. And whilst I was working as a real estate broker, I was approached by B'nai B'rith to find a location for them that would hold up an option for at least a year and a half. And I was lucky enough to find the 5 acres for them that filled their bill. And today it has 277 apartments and over 350 people living in there, because the state of Maryland gave them a special building which was housing for handicapped people, as well as housing for people who needed more than just an apartment. In 1986, we decided to retire. I had several heart attacks, and we moved to Arizona and came to Tucson. I got my real estate broker's license back after passing the exam, and I became a real estate broker. In 1988, B'nai B'rith Senior Housing came to me and said, "We have a job for you. We have no housing setups west of the Mississippi, and we would like you to help us getting some buildings done," because they knew I had been very successful in Maryland. I gave the largest in Phoenix first ideas on this, and after 2 years nothing happened. I don't know why. And I went back to another convention of B'nai B'rith, and they asked me, "What have you done for us lately?" And I told them the story, and they said, "Why don't you start in Tucson?" And in end of September 1992, I decided to go to work on setting up a place here in Tucson. And sure enough, we found a piece of ground that was suitable. And in 1993, we got the award for 79 apartments. Actually, it was 80 apartments, but we called it 79 in the manager's office. And I still remember when the people from Phoenix came down and looked at the ground where we had nothing built yet. They were laughing. They could not see what you could do with it. And it turned out that we build a showplace that has great great help from HUD today, because the district, the federal district in which we are is District 10, and which is also the border for HUD. And they have always said that we have one of the finest buildings in the Western districts. I also got involved with putting up a building in North Hollywood, California, where I trained the people to learn how to do this whole bit of looking for housing for the elderly, the ground, and the whole process. And we built 91 apartments in North Hollywood. We got a second allocation from HUD in 1996 and opened this one in 2001, where we now have a complex of 119 apartments. And the new building that we got the allocation for in 2003 will have 81 apartments, so we have built 200 apartments when this one is finished. I'm very proud of what I have accomplished. I'm very proud of all the assignments that I had, and I hope my job for B'nai B'rith is over with the latest building, which will be a showplace. For a change, I have a board where I don't have to do any work, because we have people who are interested in doing the landscaping, doing the library, doing the wellness center, which is an exercise room, and doing the decorating of the building as a whole. And that, in a very short setup, is my story.